Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Jnana Tiranasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Padamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakalam Shri Guru Vaishnavasya Shri Rupam Savijatam Sahagana Sanatam Sujivam Sadvekam Sadhutam Parinarasayitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Shri Sankirtan Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandhu Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namaste Bhakta Kanchana Gaurani Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusuti Devi Namaani Hare Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhuvecha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shuddhamagi Vachata Deshakarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. In a few months, we will modify outdoor setting. Is it too loud? You can hear? Any more you can hear? Okay. So, today we'll be discussing verse number 10 from chapter 12. What is the title of this chapter? Devotional service. So what do we think Krishna is going to speak about in this chapter?
How we can serve him.
How we can serve him, yes. So this is the last chapter of this section of the Bhagavad Gita. So the Bhagavad Gita is broken up into 3 sections. The first 6 chapters, the next 6 chapters, 7 through 12, and then the final 6, 13 through 18. So chapters 7 through 12 are speaking on the topic of devotional service. So Krishna has glorified devotional service beginning from chapter 7, continued in chapter 8, extensively in chapter 9, how to become fixed in devotional service with faith of the opulences in chapter 10, establishing the supremacy of Krishna in his original form in chapter 11, and now he is speaking about this details of devotional service. So in verse 8, Krishna had said, just fix your mind upon me, the Supreme Personality of God, and engage all your intelligence in me. Thus you'll live with me always without a doubt. So here Krishna is speaking about a very high platform of pure devotional service. And in this platform, it is when one is spontaneously attracted and attached to Krishna. So where one's concentration and mind fixed upon the Lord is based out of one's attraction. It doesn't take any external stimulus to inspire this devotee to chant rounds, to read about Krishna, to render service. Why? Because they are spontaneously attracted to Krishna. Actually, we know what is the meaning of the name word Krishna? All attractive. So when you say all attractive, it means all attractive. Everything that is attractive in the entire of creation resides within Krishna. He is the supreme attractive. Whatever we find attractive in this material world, whether it being nature, matter, relationships, different activities, Krishna being all attractive is the supreme source of that attractive feature. And when one has realized that, then one is spontaneously attracted to Krishna. And thus one is able to fix their mind in Krishna. Right? Can you fix your mind in something you don't know anything about? Can you fix your mind in something that you are not in some way attached to? We give the example of, the businessman is so attached to their business and making money that is there a moment that passes where they're not spontaneously, naturally thinking about their business or their money? Does it happen for even a moment? Do they have to naturally sit down, okay, 2 hours in the morning, I'm going to now meditate on my business? No. Because that's where their attachment is. So when one awakens this love for Krishna, there's a spontaneous attachment to Krishna. It is like a magnet and a piece of metal. Do you have to do anything to bring the magnet and metal together? How does it happen? Naturally. Like that, the spirit soul, the living entity, is eternally attached and connected to Krishna. So let me ask one question. How many of us are spontaneously, naturally attracted to Krishna 100% of the time? They're not. So what's the situation? What has happened? If it is an eternal fact that our spirit soul is naturally attracted to the Supreme Lord, then where is that attraction? Why is it that I'm tempted by other lesser pleasures? So, like that magnet and the piece of metal. If I put this book between the magnet on one side and the metal on the other side, will I be able to feel the attraction between the two? Not so much. Maybe none, depending on the strength of the magnet. Why?
The barrier.
There's a barrier.
Obstacle.
What's sitting between the two objects? Some sheets of paper, right? Don't try this, but if I started taking sheets of paper out one by one, slowly, what would happen to that magnet and that piece of metal?
Attraction.
You could start to feel it a little bit more, and as I take more and more pieces of paper out, the presence of the paper, did it disturb the natural tendency of that magnet and that metal to be attached to each other?
No.
That was untouched. That's a fact. But simply, the experience was not held because there was some barrier. So like that, there is a barrier between experiencing our natural attachment for Krishna and where we are today. And what is that barrier? All of the impurity. Maya is the enabler of that barrier, but it is the impurities in the heart. We have acquired some impurities in the heart. Lust, anger, greed, pride, envy, illusion. So the presence of those in the heart are like the presence of sheets of paper between that metal and that magnet. So how did we reattach that metal and that magnet? We removed the sheets of paper. So Krishna says in the 9th verse, "My dear Arjuna, O winner of wealth, if you cannot fix your mind upon me without deviation, then follow the regulator principles of Bhakti Yoga. In this way, you'll attain desire. You'll develop a desire to attain me." So, what to do if we don't have spontaneous attraction to Krishna? Are we stuck? What does Krishna say?
Fake it till you make it.
Fake it till you make it. And yeah. So what should we do? What are the activities one should do?
Practice devotion.
Practice devotional service. Right? And specifically follow what in devotional service? Regulative principles of devotional service. So what is the purpose of practicing the regulative principles of devotional service?
To facilitate the progress.
To facilitate the progress towards what
Krishna
goal?
consciousness.
Krishna consciousness. And what type of Krishna consciousness? What we spoke about in the prior verse.
Spontaneity, to get that spontaneity.
Spontaneity. Whether the natural inclination does now come out.
Yeah.
So the regulative principles of devotional service are meant to bring about this dormant, natural love for Krishna. It's already there. Just like that magnet and that metal, they're already attracted to each other. All we have to do is remove the impediments, the barriers. So the regulative principles of devotional service, they purify the heart. They intensify the taste. And by doing so, this spontaneous natural attraction will awaken. Where does one find that natural attraction? Where is it? That pure love of Krishna, where is it residing? Huh?
In our hearts.
In our hearts. It's right here. We just don't yet perceive it. Just like that magnet and that metal are right there, so close to each other. By the simple manipulation of moving that paper, you awaken. Similarly, by the regulative practice of devotional service, one will purify and elevate to the point of spontaneous devotional service. Because that is actually our eternal position. To be in loving service with Krishna. It is a single activity that gives the spirit soul true ananda. Everyone is in search of ananda, happiness. And it exists eternally in loving relationship with Krishna. So Krishna says, if you're not yet spontaneously attracted to me, no problem. Practice the regulative principles of devotional service. And soon, by that practice, what does he say? In this way, develop a desire to attain me. So what are some examples of regular principles of devotional service? Huh? Chanting. That's the number one. What else?
Following the do nots, like no meat eating, no
Okay.
intoxication.
So the do nots. Technically, the do nots are not part of devotional service, but they are the barriers to performing devotional service. Right? So the negative principles constitute the things that dampen our devotional service. But we know devotional service means what? What is the meaning of devotional service?
Expression of love.
Expression of love to?
It's like it's a service to Krishna.
Service to Krishna. For the pleasure of Krishna. Right? So it's a service as an expression of our love to Krishna. So abstaining from certain activities isn't yet an activity to please Krishna. But it's a critical part to be able to render that service. So our acharyas comment on this verse that the regular principles spoken of here are referring to the Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti principles that Srila Rupa Goswami has explained in Nectar Devotion. So there's chanting. What else is there?
Following in the footsteps of acharyas.
Following in the footsteps of our acharyas who have practiced devotional service in the perfected stage. If I want to be a great tennis player, what do? I go learn from a great tennis player. If I want to be a great devotee, I learn from a great devotee. So following in the footsteps, right? What else?
The 9 processes of devotional service.
9 processes of devotional service. What are a couple of those? Shravanam. What is Shravanam? Hearing. What we are doing here, we are hearing from Srila Prabhupada about devotional service. Right? What else?
Kirtan.
Kirtan. We just did some kirtan. Kirtan is so pleasing to the ears, so pleasing to the mind and consciousness. Eating prasadam. How we can forget eating prasadam? Honoring prasadam is the easiest of all modes of devotional service. Unfortunately, in the current scenario, we have to do in separation. But soon again, when it is safe to do so, we will honor prasad together and enjoy. But honoring prasadam is a great act of devotional service. Any other?
Vishnu Smaran.
Vishnu Smaranam, thinking of Krishna. That is the foundation of all devotional principles. And so like this, there are so many things. But the goal of all of those activities is to awaken us spontaneously. And so who guides us in the practice of the regular principles? The spiritual master, the Guru. The Guru explains to us and guides us specifically in the practice of these regular principles. And thus Rupa Goswami says the first step, the first anga, is to take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master who can then explain the other practices of devotional service. And so Srila Prabhupada speaks about in the purport, to practice the regular principles of Bhakti Yoga, one should under the guidance of an expert spiritual master. So this is a critical step, right? And when one does, in this state, the practice of devotional principles is inspired by an external circumstance. I have made a vow to my spiritual master to chant my mantras nicely, to read Srila Prabhupada's books, to render service. I've also made a vow to abstain from the 4 regular principles: meat eating, intoxication, gambling, and illicit sex. So my impetus to follow is external, following the guidance of the spiritual master. And as one purifies, that impetus becomes internal. It becomes a spontaneous desire to still do the same activities: chanting, reading, singing, honoring prasadam. The activities are the same. The only difference is, what is that impetus, internal or external? It will naturally happen internally as we remove the impediments in life. So now Krishna has explained these 2 positions. And now in verse 10, he's going to explain, well, if you can't do spontaneous devotional service, if you can't yet do and follow the regular principles of devotional service, then what? Are you stuck? Is there no hope? Of course, we know Krishna is so merciful. So he tells us in verse 10, what is the next option? Somebody like to read the verse? You can read the English as well.
If you cannot practice the regulations of Bhakti Yoga, then just try to work for me. Because by working for me, he would come to the perfect stage.
Report? And we can read a little bit. Report? Yes.
One who is not able to even practice the regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga under the guidance of a spiritual master can still be drawn to the perfectional stage by working for the Supreme Lord. How to do this work has already been explained in the 55th verse of the 11th chapter. One should be sympathetic to the propagation of Krishna consciousness. There are many devotees who are engaged in the propagation of Krishna consciousness, and they require help. So even if one cannot directly practice the regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga, one can try to help such work. Every endeavor requires land, capital, organization, and labor. Just as in business, one requires a place to stay, some capital to use, some labor, and some organization to expand, so the same is required in the service of Lord Krishna. The only difference is that in materialism, one works for sense gratification. The same work, however, can be performed for the satisfaction of Krishna. That is spiritual activity. If one has sufficient money, he can help in building an office or temple for propagating Krishna consciousness. Or he can help with publications. There are various fields of activity, and one should be interested in such activities. If one cannot sacrifice the result of his activities, the same person can still sacrifice some percentage to propagate Krishna consciousness. This voluntary service to the cause of Krishna consciousness will help one to rise to a higher state of love for God. Thereupon one becomes perfect.
So what is the goal for everyone to become?
Krishna conscious.
In life, we all want to be perfect, right? So the perfectional stage is pure devotional service. So what was explained in both verses 8 and 9 are the perfectional stage of devotional service. So one following the Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti principles, remember, that's still within the realm of pure devotional service. The one is fully giving themselves to the service of Krishna, acting under the guidance of Guru. So here, Krishna says if you cannot do that, then what to do? So what does Krishna say we should do? Huh?
Help those who are engaged in Krishna consciousness, help those people.
Help those. How can we practically help those? I wrote examples.
Oh, are you sure?
Yeah.
Well, they say for Krishna consciousness it requires land, it requires, different materials. However, it's not materialistic because it's used in the glorification of Lord Krishna.
Perfect. So, Prabhupada explains now practically, if you're not ready to, when we do devotional service, one acts only for the pleasure of Krishna. One is only acting for the pleasure of Krishna. One renounces their own desires. Even in the regular principles, one is acting according to the instructions of Guru, who's guiding one on how to please Krishna. Right? So that's a. So Krishna says here, though, if you're not ready there, you do whatever work you want to do. But then what should you do with the results? Use it. So some of you who studied the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita know what type of activity is this?
Is this karma yoga?
Yes, karma yoga. And what kind of? There's 2 types of karma yoga.
Sakam.
Huh?
Sakam.
Sakam and
Nishkam.
Nishkam.
This is Sakam.
So when one, Prabhupada says, person can still sacrifice some percentage to propagate Krishna consciousness, this in essence is referring to Sakam Karma Yoga. One is willing to give up some of their fruits to Krishna. Some of the results. They still have some desire to enjoy the fruits, so they're giving up some of the fruits to Krishna. But the point here is that one can continue doing the works that they desire to do, but use the means, the results, to support some of Krishna consciousness. And what happens when one does that? What is the result?
Comes to the stage of sadhana bhakti.
You come to the stage of sadhana bhakti. So Prabhupada says the voluntary service to the cause of Krishna consciousness will help one rise to the higher state of love of God. So by doing this activity, one will purify. Right? It is purify of what?
Anartas.
Our anartas,
Material desires.
material desires. Because what is precluding me from working only for Krishna's pleasure? What is preventing me? Some personal desires. Right? Some personal desires. Now we may naturally think, well, wait a minute, shouldn't we have some personal desires? Like, well, as we know, the less personal desires we have and the more desires we have for Krishna, the actual more we enjoy and the better we are off. But it takes some consciousness and experience to understand that, to accept that as a fact. But that is a fact. You may choose not to accept it or may take some time. So if one hasn't yet accepted that reality, it means there's some personal desire, some personal motives. So Krishna says, no problem. You sacrifice what you are ready to sacrifice for me, and by doing so, you will purify and begin to see that when you work for me, you actually obtain the highest of all benefits. Unfortunately, our mind is conditioned by the material world. What happens in the material world when they work for somebody else? Who wins?
Someone else.
The recipient of our work, right? The
Yeah.
boss.
Yeah.
And who loses?
Yeah, the one who does.
The worker,
Yeah.
right? The recipient takes more of the profits and the worker takes some small share.
Yeah.
Right, Ambrish?
Yeah.
You started working today.
Yeah.
Right? So, that's the material world. So as soon as Krishna says, you work for me, where does our mind immediately go to?
Krishna?
What about me?
What about me? Krishna, that's nice of Krishna to say. You work for me and give me all the fruits. Wow, that's pretty noble of him. But like we know, when you read a sign in the mirror, right? How does that sign appear? Looking at it in the mirror.
Backward?
Yeah.
Backwards. It's flipped, right?
Yeah.
Everything's flipped, right?
Yeah.
Left is right and right is left.
Mm.
The material world is like a reflection of reality,
Yeah.
the spiritual world. So what we see in the reflection is, yes, we render service to the boss, we lose, boss gains. But in the spiritual world, it's the exact opposite. When we render service to Krishna, who wins? We do. We obtain the greatest of all, eternal peace and happiness. Of course, Krishna doesn't lose either because it's a spiritual equation, and so he wins also. So at our first blush, by conditioning, we think, that's pretty selfish of Krishna to say, hey, you do all the work and you give me the fruits. But actually, this is the means by which Krishna reciprocates. And ultimately to his devotees who serve him like this, he gives everything. But again, it takes some faith and some knowledge to understand this. So Krishna says, okay, if you're not there yet, just render some service. Maybe inspired by your desire to do some good. Help build a temple. Donate for a feast. Sponsor some books. Help contribute to some cause. Doesn't have to be money, it could be time. Go and plant some flowers in the garden of Krishna. Pull some weeds from the garden of Krishna. Paint his house. sweep his floor, do something, whatever means you have. And by doing so, one will slowly come to this perfect state. So in the next verse, Krishna says, if, however, you are unable to work in consciousness of me, so now Krishna is saying, well, if you can't do Nishkam Karma Yoga or Sakam Karma Yoga, what should you do? Are you stuck? Krishna gives another option. He says, then try to act, giving up all results of your work, and try to be self-situated. So here, Krishna is saying, and Prabhupada is commenting that, okay, if you can't give up your activities to Krishna consciousness, then at least give up your results to some good cause. Do some good charity. Learn that the act of giving results in actually gaining. So Krishna says, if you're not going to work for me, no problem. Just start the process of sacrificing your results. And these procedures are described in the Vedic rituals. Right? This is the karma kanda process. You do some yajna for some material benefit.
Okay.
And the hope is, by doing some yajna for some material benefit, one will again slowly purify. Right? Coming to that point in verse 8 is the ultimate. Verse 9, regular principles. Verse 10, working for Krishna in Nishkam Karma Yoga. Verse 11, okay, I want to enjoy my senses. Okay, at least do so in a regulated way. Do it in the process of yajna.
So, Prabhu,
Yeah.
so is this when we're saying, okay, Krishna, I'll render service unto you, but I'm doing it so in a prayerful mode to do better business after, so to ask for more money or to ask for something.
Yeah.
Is that in that way? Okay.
It's kind of a karma kanda basically.
This is karma.
Yeah.
Mm.
This is karma. Right, because if we're going to want to enjoy our senses, at least do so in a regulated way. So in the next verse, verse 12, Krishna says, if you can't take to this practice, then engage yourself in the cultivation of knowledge. Better than knowledge, however, is meditation. And better than meditation is renunciation of fruits of action. For by such renunciation, one can attain peace of mind. So here, Krishna is ultimately saying, ultimately you must come to this renunciation of the fruits of action. Because attaching to the fruits of your work will always lead to distress. We think the more wealth I get, the more happier I'll be. The more fame I get, the more happier I'll be. The more this, but it always results in more frustration, more stress, more anxiety. Peace of mind occurs when one is detached materially and fully attached spiritually. That is the only means to peace. Knowing who is the real Bhoktaram Yagnatapasa, who is the real beneficiary, the real Purusha. Just like a child, when a child is in disobedience with the rules of the house and thinks they are the controller, they are the owner, there is always chaos and distress. But as soon as the child realizes, let me work in cooperation with mother and father, then things become very harmonious. Similarly, in this material world, if we live in defiance of our Supreme Lord, then there will always be turmoil. So Krishna here in these verses, 8 through 12, is giving a progressive state of consciousness. Saying bhakti is the ultimate, the perfect stage. And there are steps. If you can't do this, do this. If you can't do this, if you can't. You see how merciful Krishna is.
It's been so kind.
So kind. And now, in verses 13 through 20 for the remainder of the chapter, Krishna is going to describe the very beautiful qualities of his devotees. And Krishna says, such a devotee of mine is very dear to me. He's going to end every one of these verses with, very dear to me, very dear to me, very dear to me. So Krishna is going to describe these very beautiful qualities. So the next several weeks, we'll take our time in going through all of these wonderful devotional qualities that are very pleasing to Krishna. And where do these qualities come from? Krishna. And how do we bring them about? How do we manifest these qualities?
Devotional service.
By devotional service. Just by devotional service. They are actually the natural qualities of the living entity. Because a living entity is part and parcel of Krishna. A piece of gold has a natural potential to be golden and sparkle. Why? Because it's part of gold. So Krishna is full of these qualities. We also have these qualities, maybe in minute quantities, but we have them. So our natural position is to be non-envious, to be tolerant, to be loving of all, to be very magnanimous. That is our natural position. Because that is what Krishna is. And to bring out these qualities, they come out by practicing devotional service. We don't have to go look for them here and there. They are right here within our own. So we'll study these qualities over the coming weeks. They're very, very beautiful and inspiring. And we can see how sweet the position is of the pure devotee who has attained these qualities, and it'll inspire us to acquire this. Any questions or comments for today? Yes.
So was George Harrison a karma yogi? Because I know he became a friend of the devotees, but he never joined the ashrama system. He kept kind of outside, but he was very involved with the devotees.
Yeah, that's a great question. So George Harrison actually was a full-on devotee. But Prabhupada asked him that you stay in your work, which was obviously a very famous musician, and you use that platform in the service of Krishna. So he was chanting his rounds every day. He was, recording some very amazing songs and spreading the holy name using his fame. So when one says that one works full in consciousness of me, doesn't mean they're living full-time in the temple. It means one is fully working for Krishna. So one can have a job and use the fruits of that work for Krishna. So when one is committed that my whole existence is to serve Krishna, it is. And whether one is in, the Hasta ashram, which includes, being in the workplace, or whether one is in the sannyasa ashram, and one is, in the renounced state. So in either state, one can be fully serving Krishna. And there are many other examples, but George Harrison is a very prominent example of that. Is he asked Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, I want to renounce and join the temple. Prabhupada said, no. You have a gift. You have some ability. It is given to you by Krishna. Use it for Krishna. And he did in that way.
I have a question follow up on that. So did he take initiation or he didn't take?
He didn't formally take initiation, but we understand that he was a very dear disciple of Srila Prabhupada. And he left his business.
He sponsored the Krishna book, right? The
He did
printing,
amazing service for Srila Prabhupada.
printing of Krishna book.
He sponsored the printing of
Yeah,
Krishna
that-
book. When he left his body, he was with devotees chanting the holy names. Krishna arranges the very wonderful departure of any soul. It was very beautiful.
Did he buy the Bhagavad Gita?
He didn't buy him, man. That was he didn't buy him.
Oh, I thought it Bhakti Vedanta Manor, that one was
John
by him.
Lennon.
It was
John Lennon.
it was get some role in it. Yes.
It seems so interesting because like Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita is so merciful, so lenient, so like gentle with us, and yet we have very high standards for ourselves. You know, even to the extent of bathing in cold water in the morning, waking up quite early, our ekadashis. But Krishna says, if you can't do what you need to do, oh, if you do this instead, I will understand. Or even if you can't do that, if you do this, I'll understand. Like, he is so merciful.
Yeah, and what we take from that mercy is that Krishna is very anxious to bring us to this highest platform. So, while Krishna is very merciful, if we have good intelligence, we'll take to the process that's been given to us very seriously. Because these other processes are very long and very risky. Ultimately, Krishna is saying you take the direct process of serving me with no pre-qualification needed, just desire. But in these other processes, it's possible that one may support, the spiritual endeavors for some time. But if they don't progress forward, they could actually go back the other way. So we, knowing the rarity of this knowledge, the rarity of having given this gift of information and connection with Srila Prabhupada, we hold on to it and take it very seriously, recognizing the great peril that we may face if we let go. Just like if you were stuck in a dark well and you've been trying to get out of this well for months and months and months, surviving on just a limited food. And all of a sudden one rope came down to take you out. Would you casually take onto that rope? It's there, maybe tomorrow. Maybe the next day. You would hold on and not let go. Srila Prabhupada is that rope for us. He has given us this information, this knowledge, to get out of the dark well and just to throw it away. But if I don't realize I'm stuck in a dark well, maybe tomorrow. So our sincerity, our discipline, our enthusiasm is born out of our understanding and appreciation for where I am and what opportunity I have. Srila Prabhupada has given us the greatest of fortune. Sometimes because it's so accessible to us, we take it for granted. We don't appreciate the great fortune.
How do we stay humble in terms of these 4 or 5 verses where we might say, okay, maybe 10 years ago I was doing this process, now I've come to a point where I can do this process, so I've made advancement. And then do we get puffed up? Our ego gets puffed up?
There's always the potential to become puffed up and proud.
Yeah.
Oh, I am now initiated, I am now this, I am now that. But it's always there. The potential is there. But if one understands that they are a tiny infinitesimal spark of the Supreme Lord, and whatever progress one has made is only by the mercy of Guru and Krishna. And one doesn't become proud of that, but one may try to utilize that in service to Krishna. So, the more we progress in devotional service, the more one should become humble. Because one is purifying like a falsehood. But, you're right, there's a tendency as one progresses, now I am a senior. Now I have status. I have been doing this for 10 years, 20 years. But actually, one should become more and more Because the more one progresses in devotional service, one realizes actually how fallen they are. And they see, wow, the purity of devotional service of the great devotees of Srila Prabhupada and our previous acharyas. So, the more one progresses, the more one should become holy. If that is not happening, there is some misstep in our regular principle of bhakti, no problem. So find it and correct it. But correct it. Otherwise, the desired result of perfection will not manifest. Because one cannot chant constantly unless Tunadapi Sunichena, Tarodapi Shunisha, Mani Namani. Then Kirtaniya Sadahari.
So one more question for you. So text 9, is that in the Sattva Gun, and then what I'm trying to say is, and then text 8 is Suddha Sattva?
No, text 9 is also in the realm of pure devotional
Is it?
service.
Okay.
Yeah. Text 9 is in pure devotional service, but it's in the aspect of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. Whereas text 8 is in Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. So they're both in the realm of pure devotional service.
In Sakam Karma Yoga, we don't follow the regulative principle, not necessarily, right?
Of Bhakti.
Yeah. But Nishkam, one begins to follow all the regulative principles and begins to take shelter of the spiritual master too? Or how does
Once
it
one
work?
takes shelter of the spiritual master,
And that
they're
becomes
in
bhakti. Okay.
Because the spiritual master is only guiding one
Okay, yeah.
who has understood Krishna is the object of my affection. So Nishkam Karma Yoga, one has a transcendental goal, but it's not yet, it's blurry, it's fuzzy. And one is purifying to understand that. And as soon as they do, they come to bhakti.
So even regulative principles is not very clear at that point of time, correct?
Like, which regular,
The nose,
the four, the don'ts.
yeah, the don'ts.
No, they may be, because those four regulative principles are followed by the pious. Right? A non-spiritualist who's pious will abstain from illicit sex, will abstain from intoxication, will abstain from violence, meeting is nothing but violence, will abstain from gambling, cheating, right? So you can be pious and follow those four principles. Those principles are the principles of dharma. They're not the principles of bhakti, right? So they're the principles of dharma. So how they become involved in our spiritual process is that one must avoid these are the pillars of sinful activities. So one must avoid these very dangerous sinful activities. These are not to be taken lightly. They are not nice to haves. Right? When we have the 64 angas of bhakti, there's some variety there. You can gravitate here and there. But these pillars of dharma, when you break them, everything is ruined. So these four regular principles are beyond just the scope of bhakti. They are the required etiquette for at minimum a basic existence. And so one should be very, 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 very attentive to following these regular principles to a T. Because when we don't, there's sinful. And that is why when one takes initiation, they take a very strong vow to follow these four things. You know, we take the vow to chant. We take the vow to chant. But we also take the vow what not to do. Because the spiritual master knows. Why is the spiritual master asking us to take that vow? To make it difficult for us? Because he knows your progress, your success will be squandered, will be squashed. You may be chanting, but if you're breaking the regular principles, then You're lighting a fire and trying to pour water on it. Prabhupada used that in a different context, but the same scenario applies. So that is why the spiritual master very emphatically, one has to recite the vows, right? When you take initiation. That I will not do it because the Guru knows. But they are not part of the process of bhakti, because bhakti is exclusively pleasing Krishna. An activity aimed to please Krishna. Me not, intoxicating is not directly pleasing to Krishna. Sure, he's appreciative that we're not breaking, but it is not. So everything in bhakti is a positive engagement in service. Now, in explaining the angas of bhakti, Rupa Goswami explains the offenses to avoid. And he gives the offenses to avoid. And there are different categories of offenses. There's the nama aparad, the offenses to the holy names, the 10 that we recite every day. And then there's the seva aparad, the different offenses in service he explains. And he gives different details there. Okay? So when one is performing devotional service, one should be attentive to the do's and don'ts. Those regulator principles are different from these regulator principles. And they're very commonly conjoined together. So I'm glad we had a good discussion on it, because they're separate, but they're related in context. Is that okay?
Thank you, sir.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki. Jai. Vaishnav Vrinda.